I want to take a moment and introduce Congresswoman Nancy Mace, 1st Congressional District, South Carolina. Great. So good to see you. A pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you. Have a seat, and kick it right off. It seems as though we have been running into each other in multiple locations. Needless to say, even
thank you for visiting.
Yeah.
Thank you for visiting DC.
Very much so, and I had the pleasure of seeing you on your way back from Ukraine. After a fact-finding mission there, and then also want to introduce now. I'll go ahead down the panel if I may. Robert Malka with Bitcoin Policy.
Bitcoin Today Coalition.
Oh, excuse me.
That's right.
Excuse me.
No worries. We advocate for Bitcoin specifically to mostly the federal side, DC, the Hill, and then we also have some interest in Treasury and state. So that's our work.
Ron Hammond.
Hey y'all, Ron Hammond here with the Blockchain Association. We are a DC trade association comprised of about 150 or 105 companies actually, and I'm the Republican lobbyist. So I talk to folks like Congresswoman Mace, as well as several others about what's happening on Capitol Hill and a lot of legislation that's soon to be moving through the Hill, which is really exciting.
And Dan Spuller, my cohort in North Carolina, but with ties to D.C. as well.
Yes, thanks you. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us today. So I'm Dan Spuller. I'm head of industry affairs for the Blockchain Association. I work here closely with Ron. And then my passion project is I'm co-chair of the North Carolina Blockchain Initiative, which we work closely with Dennis and other states across the country to advocate for favorable policy at the state level. And it's always good to be back in Charleston.
Great. Congressman, my concept for this was sort of as a staff meeting, that one that you would conduct, obviously, and discuss it with some of our pundits that are working on the Hill, as well as trying to influence things on the Hill. But maybe we just start off with where you are in the Congressional Blockchain Caucus.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about that. That was started by Mick Mulvaney, former congressman and former head of OMB, former White House chief of staff. And I believe there are about 30 members or so that are part of the blockchain caucus. And the caucuses really are just a place for us to meet and discuss issues, discuss policy, discuss legislation that we're working on and finding ways to work together. And that caucus is growing. I foresee it growing. It's currently obviously a huge need for that. But also it's a place for us to get educated. You would be shocked, at how smart some of the folks up there are, but then at how dumb some of them are. DC is kind of a place, is Hollywood for ugly people, as I like to say. And so, it's a place where a lot of folks need to be educated, myself included. And even though I come from a technology background, there's always things to learn. And particularly in this space where it can be complicated to understand, having a room and a platform and a group of individuals that can help educate other members is extremely important, particularly on technology and technical issues.
Great. And obviously, coming down the pipeline, we do know education is the key to all of this, and understanding that education. The differences in the technologies that we're talking about is not a political battle. It shouldn't be one side versus the other side at this point. This is a technology agnostic platform. Dan, you might want to pick up from there and tell us what you're doing with the Blockchain Association, perhaps. And
Sure. So we just hit a little over 100 members now. We're fast growing. We represent all different aspects of the greater blockchain ecosystem, which includes a lot of miners. But I'm not on the lobbying side of the shop. That's Ron. That's his role, and he's done a great job doing that. But one thing I did notice, I want to just point out, and this kind of ties into the educational side of things, is part of our role is we travel the country. We're all over in many, many different states, and we're very lucky here in the Carolinas to have really a strong congressional delegation, and at the Senate side too, that are very favorable towards our industry. I know we talk about Wyoming a lot, and they're doing fantastic work, so is Texas, but our two states, North and South Carolina in particular, have some incredible national leaders, including obviously Congresswoman Mace, Senator Scott from the state up in North Carolina, soon to be Senator Ted Budd, very favorable towards our industry, Congressman Patrick McHenry, and then Congressman Timmons over in South Carolina. So I just want to give ourselves, perhaps as a state, a pat on the back, because we've really done a good job educating our members of Congress, and the delegation is doing good work in Washington.
And can I piggyback on that real quick? So, I think, there's debate on what November is going to look like or post-November. I think you're going to see Republicans run the House. Senate is sort of up for grabs. But if Republicans are in the majority, Patrick McHenry, who's the ranking Republican on financial services, will be the chairman of that committee. William Timmons, also from upstate South Carolina, and I believe Ralph Norman, they're both on financial services as well. And there'll be a little bit of movement on the committees. But having that kind of leadership in place, when particularly you're talking about blockchain and Bitcoin and those things, and having someone at the helm, a leader like Patrick McHenry that understands the issue and can help move the ball forward for the industry is going to be really, really critical moving forward.
Go ahead, Rob.
Just to jump in on that, there's a fight in Congress starting between the Senate Ag Committee, which manages the CFTC, right, and banking, financial services. And one of our great fortunes is that Congressman McHenry is taking the lead on that and understands that, for example, Bitcoin is a commodity that should be under the CFTC. And so there's kind of there's a way in which we're really positioned very well come post-November for favorable regulations, a favorable regulatory framework. That supports Bitcoin and other digital assets, cryptocurrencies.
Ron, from the Republican lobbying standpoint, for the Blockchain Association, what's your read on?
Yeah, I used to be a Hill staffer on Capitol Hill for about 5 years, and 3 of those years was working on crypto legislation dating back to 2017. So beforehand, very few folks were coming in to me to educate, and now it seems like there's almost 100 folks on the advocacy side for crypto, which is really exciting. And actually, Congresswoman, one of your staffers actually was one of those who educated me when I was a staffer, actually Graham over there. So it's kind of weird that the roles have reversed here. But it's really exciting to see at least the Republicans, but also the Democrats, like folks like Ro Khanna, which Congresswoman you worked really well with, getting really up to speed on this issue and really leading here. This is a bipartisan issue. This is not a Republican issue versus Democrat or vice versa. And I'll say, besides the legislation, which I'm really excited by for next Congress, is there's also oversight, and that's what's going to be really critical. There's been a lot of complaints recently about the SEC's direction, and of course the Democrats, for the large part, have been more shielding their own. I mean, that's typical of politics as it happens. You want to make sure you watch out for your own team. But we've even seen some Democrats go against the SEC publicly and say, no, I do not appreciate the direction my party is going with this agency and others. And I'm really looking forward to the Republicans being more than happy to jump on and say, you know what, we need to have these hearings, we need to bring in front of members of Congress and hold them accountable here. So again, that's just one example, but I'm really excited to see a lot more oversight of the Biden administration, which has been typically a little more anti-crypto, not all the way through. There's been a lot of good folks on the Democrat side, but largely, unfortunately, it's been that direction.
And that's the importance of having a lobbyist. So join the association, invest in it, because that kind of advocacy is very much needed.
And moving on to that subject, obviously coming into the midterms now, we're going into the next session in January. Well, can kind of give us a summary of, from your standpoint, what the political landscape, how you see it. Obviously, the possibility we have a turn in the House, the possibility that we have a turn in the Senate. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting. My money is on Republicans running the House, and then the Senate likely going to Democrats, or at least being very close toss-up right now. It's anybody's guess at this juncture. And for me, I represent a swing district, and so I do care who's in power, especially on economic issues and fiscal policy. But I've been very effective as a Republican, as a conservative, to work with Democrats on a number of different issues. For example, as y'all brought up with Ro Khanna and I have done several pieces of cybersecurity legislation. And if you tell anybody this, it'll ruin my street cred. But I taught myself to code when I was in college. Started off with a little bit of HTML. Some say that's not really a coding language. I would disagree. But I took my first job out of school. I was making $35K a year. I knew C++, COBOL, PHP, SQL, a little bit of CSS, a little bit of WordPress when that came out as well, and some HTML. And so I'm a bit of a nerd, and I understand that cybersecurity is an enormously important issue. And technology is an important issue. And Republicans, when they are in the majority next year in the House side, there will be 5 committees on the Oversight Committee, and I will be one of the 5 committee chairmen, maybe the only female chairman, and I'll be having oversight over cyber and technology. it'll be huge, because the cyber work that Ro and I have done, who happens to be a progressive out of California, has all been through the Oversight Committee. And that is a committee where you have the squad, the socialists, within the House. Then you also have the Freedom Caucus. And the last bill that Ro and I did on oversight, we had a completely unanimous vote where we brought together the AOC squad, socialists of that side of the House, with the Freedom Caucus, and it was on a quantum computing bill, because Ro and I were arguing in favor of the bill, and you had some on both sides that wanted to argue against it. But at the end of the day, we worked together and we got it done. And I do see that bill, actually, we've passed it out of the House. It's being fast tracked in the Senate and may be signed into law in the next few weeks. And so it's very exciting. But I am very much a nerd. I'm a geek, techie kind of person. I love this stuff. But there are only a handful of us that really have a grasp of any sort of the issues and that are working together for it. So to me, I don't care who's in power. I'm already working with both sides. And if Republicans have the majority and the Senate goes to the Democrats, it's going to be even more important to have people that want to understand the issues and two are willing to work together. And sometimes being willing to work together means risking your life, literally. Because I work with Democrats as a conservative, and Ro gets the same things, we get attacked all the time. People threaten to shoot us. People threaten our family. I have a stalker right now. I mean, it just goes on. And so it's really important when you find members that are willing to reach across the aisle, even though they have a different political affiliation, that you support them, that you encourage them, you educate them, and show them your support, so that they will continue to work together and not be fearful of their bases. And so I'm really excited about what the future holds. I'm excited about the quantum bill. Ro and I are talking about doing several more pieces of legislation, and then in my role as someone who will hold a gavel on oversight in this space, we'll have a lot of opportunity to move the ball forward, and I am extremely excited about that opportunity. Hard work pays off, and persistence and being stubborn as hell.
Great,
So it's great.
Robert, obviously, we heard a little bit last night about the need for a consolidated voice of the industry, coming together as from a policy standpoint, with the Bitcoin Policy Council. How do we make all that happen?
You're asking how we can better consolidate cryptocurrency voices or Bitcoin voices?
Yeah, well, actually, obviously, we are a rural economic development initiative. We're inspiring innovation.
Yes.
Balancing basically, all the 5 tenets of Senator Scott's opportunity agenda, quite frankly. I mean, I find that as being such a clarifying level of what it is, okay, pure and simple. And it relates to everybody as a national agenda. So obviously, I'm advocating for complete adoption of that and running all of this through South Carolina, but I know I'm not going to get all of my wishes.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I'd love your guys' thoughts as well. It seems to me that the space still has a lot of work to do in terms of coordination, right? In terms of truly organizing and centralizing itself in a way where fundamentally, right, as far as Bitcoin goes, we're a decentralized movement, and so we're not all we're all working toward the same thing in our own lanes. If that's more or less what you're asking. Yeah, I mean, is that something? Is there something I'm missing in your question?
No, I'm just looking for guidance along those lines. Ron?
Yeah, happy to weigh in too, because I mean, when I was a Hill staffer, I got lobbied from folks on the the crypto side of things, the banks, the fintechs, the consumer protection groups. There's a wide array of voices. But I will say, back in 2017, 2018, 2019, when I was on the Hill, very few folks were coming to the Hill on crypto. I mean, it was just the Blockchain Association. I'd probably say 2 or 3 other folks, and that's it. And there was a huge the congressman I work for, Warren Davidson. He's the man who replaced John Boehner in Ohio. He looks at me and goes, "Where are the folks defending crypto here? Because I'm just getting hammered right now from a lot of the banks because I'm the crypto congressman." And then lo and behold, the infrastructure bill last year included this small provision basically saying that anyone could be a broker, anyone could facilitate a transaction. You are liable to the IRS. And that was a huge wake-up call, because we really fought that tooth and nail, and it looks like we're going to get some wins here, in large part thanks to Congressman Mace's efforts.
And that amendment, Ro and I had an amendment. Yeah,
it's fantastic. And I'm telling you now, there's probably, again, 100 folks now plus in D.C. who are now advocating daily on crypto, which is fantastic, because now we are a huge force in D.C. Literally 2 years ago, It was the bank lobbyists that was the huge force. Now crypto's got a good voice. Now the whole thing though is let's all stay and be on the same team. Whether you're pro Bitcoin, you're pro Ethereum, you're pro XRP, what have you. We are all in this together. You don't win market share in DC. You unite together, and that's why groups like trade associations and educational groups are so important. And so,
there is one, yeah. I mean, this actually makes me think of a point, which is that one thing that we're trying to kind of, obviously there's the regulatory framework. We all want to unite on that front. There's another piece, which is obviously the divide between proof of work and proof of stake, right? So one of the things that we're kind of figuring out with other organizations is how do we talk about that in a way that, we all want to be friends. We all want to be on the same team, but there are obvious differentiators there. As far as proof of work goes, that seems to me to be the big thing for Bitcoin, right, is to be able to prove that not just that Bitcoin is eventually going to be a carbon positive network, right? It's going to be net zero emissions by 2024, ideally, or expected. But more importantly than that, it stabilizes the grid, right? It helps with, it facilitates financial security and so on. The price that you pay, quote unquote, for proof of work is actually extremely beneficial to millions of people around the world and eventually everybody. So I think just being able to convey that aspect of things, being able to convey the benefits of proof of work is going to be an essential thing in 2023 onwards, next legislative session.
I would say, too, the argument of, asset versus security, right?
Yes.
Commodity versus security, because the recent weeks reading about the SEC and the CFTC and what they're trying to lobby Congress to, that will be fought on the floor of the House in Congress, but getting a united front, getting a united voice, obviously we think the headwinds are in your favor. However, anything can happen. And it's about getting together and having the right message and working together, even when you're not always on the same page, but working together to move forward, because that's going to be a fight that's going to happen. I mean, that's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when.
As a practical matter, one of the announcements at Bitcoin 22 this year, Jack Mahler announced that they'll be rolling out 35,000, franchise operations, with Blackhawk systems, NCR partnerships, where you'll be using you can use your digital assets to pay in Lowe's, Carrabba's, any number of outlets all around the country. How do you think that would affect, federal policy? I mean, obviously, Congress people, shop also, and seeing it as a real event, and recognizing that it is here, okay. And perhaps they've lagged at that point. What kind of
and you saw
I'm going a little off
well,
script here.
No, it's okay. But you saw it too in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, right?
Yeah.
And the use of crypto and payment systems, and then using it to sanction Russia. Those kinds of things too, and then tracking, what the richest billionaires in Russia, how they're paying and moving assets around too. It is going to be an issue that'll come up. But then, the idea of a digital dollar, right? And what does the government want to do with that? And tracking your transactions, which is an invasion of privacy, obviously. But there are a lot of issues that come with that legislatively. And again, it's everybody working together to educate members of Congress who literally, minus Warren Davidson and a handful of others, literally have no idea.
There's a lot of parent actually seeing it work, pure and simple. Robert?
Yeah, I just want to flip that too on its head and say that there's the aspect of it in which it's a payment system, and then there's the aspect of it where we can discuss mining as bringing thousands of jobs to your state, right? So because our politics is local, we can say that because mining is actually an industry, it creates, any innovation that happens in the energy space, which is mostly occurring in Bitcoin mining, actually carries across to other. Bitcoin mining is essentially server farms, right? So when you have an innovation that occurs in that space, it carries across to, say, Amazon and Netflix, who have far less incentive to innovate cool innovations in cooling, for example, like cooling their servers and so on. So just to being able to phrase it in a way that any individual congressman will understand it, that's very key. And then the other is, as you say, Congresswoman, when we talk about geopolitics and Bitcoin, or geopolitics and cryptocurrency, I suppose, one of the great things is that we can talk about things in terms of sort of the ski analogy. That is to say, we have one payment rail, which is the U.S. dollar and the U.S. stablecoin or U.S. digital currency, if that's how you want to talk about it. And then we have Bitcoin. And if somebody wanted to de-dollarize and align with China or Russia because they had to geopolitically, we can also just interact with them on the basis of Bitcoin. They don't have to operate under American hegemony, right? So that's a huge benefit to us. We can still interact with countries who might not like any of the three of us, right? maybe. But they want to have their own sovereignty, El Salvador, for example. But we can still interact and trade with them, and that's a major geopolitical advantage in the short and medium term. So there are several ways to angle this and to look at it, and it's really just about what we bring back to any individual member of
And
Congress.
to piggyback on that too with El Salvador, because I love what they're doing, but having that the ability to trade and be in the market with other countries like that brings greater prosperity to those countries. And when you have that prosperity, you have peace, you have jobs, you have economic opportunity, you have less illegal immigration, by the way, at our border. And so looking south in helping those countries too, that's another way that you can extend that prosperity and economic opportunity to other countries and have greater peace just around the world. And so again, it's back to how we're communicating and how we're messaging and how we're talking about it.
And happy to build on that too. At least in my experience, it's about know your audience and know who you're talking to, as well as what appeals to them. For a lot of the arguments we've outlined today about whether it be national security, whether it be more focused on economic empowerment or rural development. I was at the blockchain conference or summit, my apologies, in DC 2 weeks ago, and it's a totally different way they paint Bitcoin as an economic opportunity. For a lot of folks who've been locked out of generational wealth for quite some time, and this is a new asset class that folks can say, we want to get into this. This is something that we've been locked out for generations. This is awesome. And seeing that message resonate with that audience, especially Republican members of Congress who were there, a lot of Democrat members of Congress who were there, like Senator Booker, for example, Representative Byron Donalds was there as well, and seeing how there's different messages out there and how they resonate with their crowd. Really gears the education up, or ramps it up quite significantly. So it's all about knowing your audience, know what appeals to the member of Congress or the individual or the staffer who you're chatting with, because it's very, very important. There's a lot of key themes, but there's so many great facets of this technology that really can cut through on so many levels.
Dan, you want to?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, one of the fascinating things that I always like to see is our members that are actually out there building the products, the services, doing the work. We represent them. So they're the ones that are actually building the ecosystem. But consistently, the Hill staffers that we interact with, and even the members themselves, really like it when they come in to speak with them about what they're doing, whether they're constituents in the respective state or not. Highlighting the work, we bring up members frequently to Capitol Hill. And it allows us, and it helps us frame our policy positions too. Going into the next year, even this past year with the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, a lot of the conversations have been around spot market jurisdiction, taxes, securities law clarity, DeFi. These are the conversations that are being had, and our members that are building within those respective work streams help us formulate these policy positions.
All right, and do we have 3 minutes? Okay, questions? Yes.
Yeah, I noticed, I was wondering if we could discuss about blockchain vulnerabilities. I know y'all ended up speaking about how Russia ended up using Bitcoin to end up transferring money, but I do remember Canada also doing that because they ended up cutting off Canada's money source with the truckers and everything. But what I really want to discuss is the vulnerabilities of the blockchain network and how it can end up being used against us. For instance, a lot of people in this room is probably wondering why they ended up losing money on Bitcoin, or why the markets are crashing, or why Wall Street and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are immersed together. The problem is Wall Street's fatal flaw is that it's immersed into crypto. So whatever ends up happening to crypto ends up taking down the entire market. That's why you end up having a lot of analysts that's confused whenever they see the global markets crashing around the world, whenever they see that it might be a tax increase. And then I also have just one little thing that I would like to understand. If it does end up affecting the markets, what happens whenever say the CEO of Pfizer, hold on.
But pay attention to what he says next.
It's really fulfilling of a dream that we had together with my leadership team when we started.
So I'm happy to address that.
The CEO of Pfizer is saying that 50% of the planet will not be here in 2023. How is that going to affect the markets?
Al Gore said that too, I think, in the year 2000.
Well, it's right here, and 52% of the planet has been vaccinated. Would y'all like to care to comment?
Well, I'm happy to talk about the financial risk here because actually there was a report that came out on Monday from the banking regulators, the federal ones, the OCC, SEC, a lot of acronyms you may or may not be familiar with, like FDIC, CFPB, what have you. And basically they said, right now, crypto doesn't pose a systemic risk to the financial ecosystem. The Wall Street money that's in crypto right now, it's not going to bring down the whole market. Now, there's correlations, though. Just like
End up joining Facebook groups, say like blockchain, Binance, Bitcoin groups, import-export groups, end up flooding conspiracies in there, triggers a sell-off, then you end up having people start
finish just addressing
Well, don't get $300.
Yeah.
I kind of just wanted to ask.
well, there's
Yeah, we only have so
correlations,
much time, unfortunately. And we,
There's always correlations in the market, though. I mean, just like with real estate, there's like there is with crypto. I mean, when the market is generally tanking, so are other asset classes. And so the good thing is that there's no systemic risk identified, at least by the Assoc report that came out on Monday. As crypto increases adoption, though, we definitely could probably see that happening in the future. But at least right now, according to a lot of the experts right now, there isn't that correlation. But again, remember, all these asset classes are affected when there is a market downturn.
what, what,
One of the things you brought up a few minutes ago was what happened in Canada, and that is a concern, I will say, which we oppose CBDCs, generally programmable money. We think that's very concerning. But there's a problem, though, with, and so Bitcoin, I don't think is the concern, is what you're worried about. But there is a concern around privacy, and that's why I don't think a pure-play digital dollar would work in the United States. There are great alternatives, such as we've seen with dollar-backed stablecoins, like in synthetic CBD, like USDC, for example. So there's options there, I think, and alternatives. You want to wrap it up?
yeah, unfortunately, we have to, I know we could continue this, for the rest of the afternoon easily enough. And, we've touched on a number of issues here, a little bit outside of the scope of this particular panel right now. But just, one quick note, in our previous keynote with Caitlin, talking about the industry as a whole, the fact that we have a new business model that's being created over, for money transmitted licensing, that may go to the state, and the fact that all of this really is still an experiment in so many areas. So we're all learning, and we're making the rules, and and we are the ones that are transforming the financial system for the next generation. So with that, I want to thank Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Robert Malka, Ron Hammond, and Dan Spuller.